Social media has become an inescapable and intrinsic part of our lives. It has profound implications on our connectedness, our ability to communicate and share in real time, and has become a necessary tool in both our work and personal lives. It has also had a profound effect on shaping our societies and political discourse. It has the ability to direct and shape our opinions, curate the things we are exposed to create new habits, and even rewire our brains. There is growing alarm over the effects of social media in enhancing loneliness and mental health issues, despite the idea of connectedness being at its core. There's also concerns over its impact on amplifying political polarization, apathy, disenfranchisement, and its ability to alter human pathways and habits. Some are actively pushing for restrictions on social media and heavy regulation of its content, while others contend that a laissez-faire internet is of paramount importance to society. Despite contending views on what the future of social media should look like, the social media landscape is already rapidly changing. From discussions of regulation to banning TikTok, to the acquisition of Twitter by self-proclaimed free speech absolutist Elon Musk, the social media sphere is already rapidly changing. These platforms dominate our lives. And given that they have risen to the front and center of the political arena, it is paramount that we understand the impact and information social media can provide. In this video, I hope to break down the history of social media, how it has evolved to what it is today, and the impact it has had on our society and politics. I also try to tackle the future of social media and how we can shape the processes of its evolution for the betterment of society. It's a lot to tackle, but I hope you'll stick with me. My name is Nathaniel, and this is Let's Talk Politics. Now, a quick disclaimer before we jump straight into this. I think social media is a very important issue that is politically relevant, especially in light of what's going on in the US with talks about banning TikTok. However, this video is also doubling as a capstone project for a university course that I'm taking on social media. And because of that, there are certain elements and topics of discussion that I feel are necessary to add to this video, with it serving as my final project for the course. So I've tried to structure the video in a way that is intuitive for the audience, but also makes sense within the context of my course and this assignment. Additionally, many of these sources for this video are from my course content, and that is not really because they're linked to a specific perspective or bias. Most of the sources are studies, so I just think they strengthen the overall content of the video and bolster the points I'm making. But because I always want to make my videos as fact-based and as transparent as possible, I just wanted to let you guys know about this up front. And as always, you can find all of my sources in the description if you want to take a closer look or do some further reading for yourself. As usual, there will be chapters in the description down below so that you can jump to the parts of the video that interest you the most. I know that's a lot for an intro, so without any further meandering, let's get into how social media and politics are inescapably intertwined. So depending on how you look at it, I've highlighted 7 or 8 aspects of social media that directly connect with the political world. Some of these I'm going to look at much more in depth later in the video when I get to the actual impact that social media has had on society. I have 4 specific topics that I really break down, but I just want to highlight these 7 areas of connection. The first is social media impacting legacy media. Traditional media has really been responsible for reporting and disseminating politics. And so social media has really reframed how we report news, how we handle news. So social media has had a significant impact on legacy media and our dissemination of political content, information, reporting, all that sort of stuff. Secondly, social media has had an effect on connectedness, well-being, mental health, anxiety. And I think you can make an argument that an unhealthy society will breed unhealthy politics. Now, that would be an entire other video, a whole different thesis, but I wanted to make that connection because I think we have seen a lot of negative impacts on our society discourse, mental health as a result of social media, and I do think that bleeds into the political sphere. Then polarization. It's well documented the effects of social media on creating and amplifying polarization in society. And polarization is really primarily a political issue. Then there is protest movements, mobilization, and activism. Social media has revolutionized protests and activism, and I'm going to talk about this in depth later, much like polarization. But obviously, activism, protests, and mobilization, that's inherently a political action. Protest is inherently political, and social media has redefined protest and has enabled protest in new ways, meaning, again, it has had a profound effect on the political landscape in that sense. Then there's biometrics, privacy, and public health. If you think about the amount of information that social media websites and companies collect about individuals, biometric security, our phones scan our face, our fingerprints, all this sort of stuff. There is a wealth of information that is now just out there that was not previously available, that we've willingly surrendered, and that obviously can have political ramifications. Similarly, with the public health end of things, we have seen how something like COVID, which should be a health issue, not a political one, has become extremely politically divisive. And so social media has really lent itself to drawing in things that previously would have been apolitical into the political sphere. Our second to last connection is audiences and influencers. So the reach that ordinary individuals in the public now have is much more vast, or can be much more vast than it traditionally has been. And there's misinformation now that can be easily spread and disseminated. Influencers can push agendas, promote topics, businesses, all that sort of stuff. There's a whole new type of business and industry around influencers and targeting audiences that has emerged out of social media and is not solely political, but can be used or applied in the political context. Then finally, there is access. Firewalls, VPNs, government censorship, all this sort of stuff contributes to the idea of access of media and social media and digital content. And again, this is obviously something that has emerged in the social media era because it applies to social media. The question of what access to social media you have is only a question that you can ask in a world where social media already exists. And obviously, given what we've just established in terms of all those connections to politics, limiting or filtering the type of access you have to these types of platforms is obviously also going to have political ramifications. And so given how social media and politics connect in all these ways, I also want to highlight how it's just inescapable the impact that social media is also going to have on shaping the future of our politics and political discourse. When something is so influential as it is right now, whether it stays the same or it gets taken away, no matter how you look at it, that is going to have some impact on the future of politics. And I think that is really important to understand. So now let's quickly take a look at the history of social media. Social media technically originates before digital media and the social media as we understand it today. And so social media can be thought of as encompassing more traditional media and communication forms as well. But social media as we think of it today really starts to take shape in the 90s through internet messaging and chat groups. This would have been the most rudimentary form of modern digital social media. And it's kind of generally agreed upon that the first true social media platform was called 6 Degrees, based on the idea of 6 degrees of separation. But even that that originated in the late 90s and fell apart pretty quickly. The true beginning of modern social media, where it actually really begins to take off, starts with LinkedIn and MySpace. There's some other sites from the early 2000s like Tumblr, Flickr, and Reddit that emerged. Some of them have evolved to stay relevant today, and others have kind of just fallen out, like MySpace has. Then Facebook comes along and completely revolutionizes the social media experience as we know it, and in my view, that is really the origin of the everyday social media we see today. Facebook is still a hugely dominant player in the social media sphere. Meta, as a company, owns a bunch of very influential social media platforms. And so I think Facebook really sets the foundation for the social media that we know today, the social media that has really profound impacts on politics. So to understand the modern social media today and its impacts, first we need to understand that social media actually casts quite a wide net. We already established that social media can even apply to traditional media sources, and that it would have existed before the digital social media emerged. And so with that in mind, it also expands beyond what we might traditionally think of as social media. Platforms like Discord or Slack that are really chat oriented, even a messaging app like Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp, those all fall under the guise of social media. Even certain online forums. I really am interested in urban planning and architecture. I follow Skyscraper Cities. That's an online forum. And that would also fall under the category of social media. The actual definition of social media as per Oxford Languages is websites and applications that enable users to create and share content or to participate in social networking. So you can see how that is actually a much more broad definition and how it would apply to something like my Skyscraper City forums that I like to visit. Some people would even argue that a platform like Wikipedia, because it's kind of like crowdsourced and anyone can edit it, even that is a form of social media. When you take that definition, you see that it applies broadly, and in turn, not all social media platforms are going to have extensive influence. A lot of it comes down to what is known as platform affordances. And affordances are essentially what you can actually do on the platform. So let's take a platform like Discord, for example. The way that it is laid out, what you can and cannot do on the platform, is obviously very different from something like Twitter or Instagram. On Discord, you have essentially what are big chat rooms where dozens or even thousands of people can come together to discuss shared topics or ideas, to converse over games, to basically host calls, all that sort of stuff. And so it's a very, chat is linear. It's a very participatory space where everyone is brought in and nothing is really elevated, no voice is really elevated over another. When you compare that with a platform like Twitter, you have, accounts with followers. It's not so much of a linear or chronological discussion as it is, the comments that are most liked or the posts that are most liked, shared, retweeted, whatever that may be, are elevated to the top. There's an algorithm that dominates and controls how Twitter posts and information is disseminated. And so that's a very important distinction to make, because I want to single out a few platforms that I think are particularly influential. There are a few specific platforms with their affordances, their algorithms, the vast data collection that they can partake in, and the illusion of community spaces, which I'm going to get to, that make them particularly influential, more so than most social media platforms in the political sphere. In my opinion, these platforms are Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, and TikTok. I think those are the 5 most influential platforms in the political arena. And so when I'm discussing social media and its impact and effects on politics and discourse, I'm going to be primarily thinking in terms of those platforms. So now let's examine social media and its impact on politics and political discourse. You could have an almost endless discussion when it comes to the effects of social media on politics. And so I've tried to break this down into 4 key parts: data collection, algorithms and polarization, the effects on legacy media and news consumption, and activism and mobilization. As you can see, those are all things that I highlighted earlier when I talked about the impact or the interconnectedness between social media and politics. And I think these are particularly important issues to zero in on with the platforms that I have highlighted. So first, let's talk about data collection. To me, this is one of the most significant and influential aspects of social media on politics. And while the connection might not immediately be clear, you start to realize that the amount of data social media companies collect can actually have profound implications on the political landscape. So what can these social media companies track? Well, depending on the platform you're using, a wide variety of things. They can track what content you view, what content you like, what content you engage with, how long you engage with that content. It can track also things like your location, your friends, people you tag in posts, phone contacts. Some apps require access to your contacts. Some even require keystroke access. TikTok would be a good example of this. So what does this information actually allow them to do? Well, they can basically determine your interests, what types of things you enjoy, engage with, watch, listen to. Typically, they can gauge with considerable accuracy your personal beliefs and perspectives on various issues. They can determine where you live, where you work, places you've traveled to, the makeup of your family, and a lot of this information is voluntarily given. For example, you will, on Facebook, give them your relationship status. You will tag family members, all these sorts of things. And so they can have a very intricate picture, not just of who you are, but the people who are around you, what they believe. And this is all used to create very comprehensive, complex files on individuals to feed the algorithms. Now, the reason all of this extensive information gathering is in place is because social media represents an inversion of the typical product and consumer model. Typically, companies will create products, and we as individuals then consume the products. But you'll notice that social media apps are by and large free to use, but they are not free to operate. They have huge amounts of capital and investment behind them, large teams working to make sure they run smoothly, and that all comes at a cost. And it is not simply the goodwill of these mega corporations that keep social media platforms afloat. There has to be a business model there. And in that business model, like I said, the product-consumer relationship gets inverted, where we as humans are actually the product. And ad companies primarily are buying our time and essentially our eyeballs. They are buying our eyeballs to see their ads. And so fundamentally at its core, these algorithms are designed to keep you on the platforms longer so that you will see more ads, and also so that they can make sure that the ads you are seeing are targeted specifically towards you. That is why I see lots of ads for Lego, because I am a huge Lego collector and Lego fan, and they know that. Of course, you have all seen this. You have all seen where you've recently lurked for something, searched for something, maybe even talked about something, and then shortly thereafter gotten an ad, because in some cases, these apps are even listening to what you have to say. And so that is the fundamental reason for this data collection. In of itself, you could argue that it's maybe not ill-intentioned, but it can be used as such. This data, these extensive portfolios, can be sold or potentially stolen by hackers, leaked on the internet, whatever that may be. And even if this is not legal, it happens. A great example of this is the UK consulting firm Cambridge Analytica, now defunct after a huge scandal where they were using Facebook profiles and data information on individuals to run targeted ad campaigns for political parties with the goal of swaying outcomes of elections. And they actually bragged about changing the outcomes of dozens of elections worldwide. And so here you can see that is clearly a profound political impact. Facebook was utilized by the Donald Trump campaign in 2016 in a way that it had never been used before, and it was a key component to him getting elected. And they used these creator tools, these insights, and this data information, and they used it to target swing voters, for example, who were gullible and susceptible to having their perceptions changed on various issues. And so there's very specific and targeted campaigns that go on using this extensive information empire to influence and change people's opinions on a political level, and that can have profound impacts. Now, this ties nicely into algorithms and polarization because, like I said, the goal of these algorithms primarily is to keep you online longer so that you can basically see more advertisements and companies can buy more ad space. That's how these companies are making money. But one of the arguably unintended consequences of this is that these algorithms show you more and more of what you want to see because that is what keeps you on the platforms. So you will watch one video and you'll watch it all the way through and the algorithm will go, oh, hey, you must have really liked that. You watched the whole thing, and it will give you other similar content. It will do this either based on the content having similar keywords or ideas. Maybe it will find portfolios of people who share similar interests to you and see what else they like to watch. So it has a whole extensive array of things that it can draw on to recommend what it thinks is the ideal content you will want to watch. And the consequence of this is you end up seeing more and more of the same or very similar content, more and more of the same ideas come across your feed, and that begins to reinforce your existing beliefs. Now, this has a profound polarizing effect. It, in essence, takes a viewpoint and pushes it to a more extreme and divides people such that they are only seeing that extreme view of their content. And so you end up generally with two separate camps, as we've seen, a conservative and a more liberal camp that are now very polarized. They see each other as enemies, and whether that originated in political discourse and social media amplified it, or whether social media helped create this and then that has in turn bled into politics, can be debated, but nevertheless it has permeated our politics and our political landscape. So you now have a very hostile and vitriolic environment with two sides dead set on opposing each other, who see each other as enemies, who cannot come to any sort of common ground, in large part because they are constantly having their own beliefs reinforced through social media algorithms. This also connects to social media's effects on traditional news consumption. Earlier, we established the connection between social media and news consumption and news and politics, where news is the primary disseminator of political information. Social media and digital media in general have revolutionized the way news is experienced and digested. And because news is the primary disseminator of political information, obviously, when the news landscape changes, how we receive our political information changes, and so does the political landscape itself. One of the big differences we see is that news can be updated in real time now. Previously, you would get your daily paper, you get it in the morning. It would have yesterday's stories, maybe stories from earlier in the week, and that would be fixed. When the paper went out, the paper went out. And anything that happened that day would not be widely known until the next issue came out. And so you had a bit of a delay in information. You had time for newspapers to verify and corroborate these stories. And digital media has changed that. It's transformed that because you can now have news updates in real time. When you go to a website, those headlines are updating constantly throughout the day. You are not fixed with your morning headlines. As stuff happens, you have rolling coverage of it. And so you could have, a dozen different headlines or head pages, front pages throughout the day, which is very, very different from a newspaper. It also means that there's a rush to break stories first and to get that information out there so that people go see your news outlet over your competitors. And this can create a problem for integrity, how verifiable the information is. It can lead to false information being posted or incomplete information being posted. Sometimes, especially on very difficult subjects, a lot of information can be very murky, and without having the time to sift through that because you want to break the story, you can get the facts wrong, and that can have really damaging repercussions. Additionally, in order to expand their reach, all of these news companies are going to be on all the various social media platforms. This means that they are going to have a different page for every social media platform and their news content is going to have to be adjusted for those platforms' affordances. And so the same article could look different on every single platform because they have to cater and tailor that article to the platform they are sharing it on. And because social media algorithms prioritize engagement, it leads to clickbait titles, misleading titles, content that will produce an emotional reaction. And so in order to really ensure that people notice a news article or get drawn into whatever is being published, news companies have to create flashy headlines. They have to be able to draw the reader in and actually get their attention. Otherwise, they'll just scroll past it and the algorithm might not even recommend their content again. This again has a cascading effect because not only could you have an article with a different title on every platform or a title on social media platforms that is very different from the actual news article, that title can also be misleading. In some cases, people will scroll through it, just read the headline and not click through to the actual article because that involves taking you off of the social media platform, and will instead just take the headline itself as news, even though it was just designed to draw you in and really does not cover the event at all. So in general, social media has created a system wherein integrity in reporting has really declined in favor of, again, trying to draw readers in, clickbait titles, and has created a sort of domino effect where people will read headlines and believe that they are consuming the news. And through that, misinformation, false conceptions can begin to spread very quickly. These media companies also have to contend with the rise of independent journalism, small reporters who could be first to a scoop just by the nature of their proximity to the event. Now, the neighbor around the corner can record that on their phone and post it on social media. And so all of this stuff has really transformed the news space. And as you can see, that has a knock-on effect to how we engage with this information, how we receive this information, and how we're ultimately more prone to getting false or unreliable information. Finally, social media has revolutionized activism and protest. There is an incredible power to mobilize protests within social media that has not existed previously. You can send out a call that will reach thousands or even millions of followers. You can coordinate things almost instantaneously across broad spectrums of people, and you can connect with like-minded individuals in cities and towns across the country and the world. And this has a mobilizing power that we have never previously seen. Now, protest is inherently political, as we've already discussed, and so obviously this new ability to organize protest movements is going to have massive political effects. You can really see this start with movements like Occupy Wall Street and Arab Spring. The Arab Spring even managed to topple some governments, and people felt like social media played a huge role in allowing that to happen. Had it not been for this, had people not been able to witness what was happening and come together quickly, such change might not have been possible. However, this has transcended just those movements and really become a global phenomenon. We saw it in the 2019 Hong Kong pro-democracy protests, the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests, and even in something negative like the January 6th Capitol insurrection. Most recently, the protests in Israel are largely thanks to the ability to mobilize through the internet, with people being able to mobilize almost instantaneously in reaction to news they disliked, coming together in the numbers of hundreds of thousands to protest hours after an event happened. And that type of pressure and power was previously unheard of. Social media has also allowed for the emergence of leaderless movements, where things are entirely coordinated in the digital space. There's no one person taking the lead, but instead cooperation amongst all the people who are supporting this movement or its ideas. And that makes protest movements a lot harder for police and authorities to target, especially if they're movements that the state feels threatened by. It can be a lot easier for protests to enact change or pile pressure because it becomes a lot harder for governments to really stamp them out. So those are 4 key examples of how social media has really profoundly impacted and shaped the political sphere as it is today. And that takes us nicely into one of the growing topics of discussion, which is regulation. Many nations want to have their cake and eat it too. They want the mass data collection abilities that come with social media, as well as the power to influence and control narratives, while also eliminating the threat that social media poses to governments through its ability to empower individuals and create mass movements. The result of these incompatible desires, as well as the threats posed by disinformation and the relatively free-for-all nature of the internet, has led to growing calls and attempts for censorship. China is the leading example of this censorship with their Great Firewall. The Great Firewall is one of the most extensive and comprehensive censorship apparatuses. In China, it is used to tightly control the flow of information, and it is largely used to isolate and protect the government from criticism, from viewpoints that they do not want their citizens to see, and to allow them to really control the narrative within the country. Other nations like Russia and India also have quite heavy internet censorship. Russia has really tightened their censorship over the course of the Ukraine war. India is well known for requesting social media platforms like Twitter or Facebook to remove posts critical of the government, threatening to bar them from the country if they don't. And generally, social medias will kowtow to these requests because the countries requesting them are such big markets. They're markets that they don't want to lose. So you can see these policies enacted in a variety of ways, whether that be through legal means, where there are laws specifically targeting the type of information that can be discussed on social media, or it can also be through unofficial channels like we're seeing in a place like India, where these governments are piling pressure on private companies to take actions on their behalf, not as a result of legal framework within the country. However, this issue extends beyond just countries like Russia, China, and India. It also includes European nations, North American countries such as Canada, the US. France recently arrested a woman who called French President Emmanuel Macron filth in an online post. It would not carry a jail sentence, but it would have a heavy fine. And this type of action can have a chilling effect on free speech. The US is obviously having discussions about banning TikTok right now, and while I actually agree with that decision on national security grounds, the method through which they are proposing to do this is by giving the government new powers to control social media and censor content and what platforms can operate in the US, and that is obviously a very dangerous precedent to set. So with all of these political impacts that social media has and the growing trends of regulation and censorship, what happens next? So I've had some camera issues. This is the third time I've had to re-record part or all of this video. So fingers crossed this will be the last take I have to do. But where do we go from here? What happens next with social media? Well, unfortunately, I think it's going to be more of the same, at least in the near future. You're going to see more attempts at censorship. You're going to see more polarization, more extremism, and there's going to be no real pushes for change because the current social media model is kind of profitable for everyone. And for just how much it endangers governments, it also empowers extremists and outsiders like Donald Trump and many of his fellow Republicans. And so there's very little incentive to change the current system because by and large, it's working pretty well for a lot of people, just not for society as a whole. Governments are going to continue to try and censor where they can because obviously there is certain things that governments do not want on the internet. And I think in some cases they'll fail, but in others they will succeed, and the internet will definitely not be the same bastion of free speech it is now, for good or for ill. I think it's definitely concerning when you look at the effects that social media is having on society and when you consider the ramifications of censorship, especially in an extremely polarized society. I do think we are sleepwalking towards a very dystopian-like future, and we need to be very aware of this. I don't say this to be an alarmist. I say this because I think we need to recognize the reality that we're walking towards, and we are walking towards a society and a system of governments that we don't really want to live in. That is not a future we should aspire to. So instead of ending on that depressing note, I want to offer an alternative vision for the future. One that I think is possible if we collectively push for a better digital future, better political future, and better democracy. You cannot legislate your way out of certain issues. It just will not work. Trying to censor the internet, trying to contain social media, target individuals will not succeed. It is only going to exacerbate the current crisis and again push us closer to that dystopic future by the precedents that are set. Instead, we need legislation that moderates social media in a positive sense, not barring or discouraging content, but encouraging certain actions. One potential example of this would be removing online anonymity. It's well documented that anonymity encourages extreme rhetoric and behavior that would otherwise not be said in face-to-face conversations. The physical wall of separation that the internet puts between you and the people on the other side encourages people to say things that they would never think of saying in their real material life. And by taking away that sense of anonymity or that shield that users feel, it could significantly tamp down the most aggressive, hateful, divisive, and vitriolic rhetoric on the internet. This is not something that can be done on its own, though. It needs to be done in tandem with other legislation like strengthened privacy laws that protect user data and their identities so that they cannot be targeted by malicious actors, government entities, all those sorts of things. We need to have very stringent data controls in place so that if we do remove the anonymous barrier on the internet, that certain people cannot then take advantage of directly knowing who you are. It's a double-edged sword, and it's something that has to be approached with the utmost amount of care, but it is one possible way to enact legislation in a bid to combat this issue in a positive sense. More broadly, however, though, I think social media needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. We need to just reconceptualize how we think of social media and social media spaces. Dave Meslin, in his book Teardown, Rebuilding Democracy from the Ground Up, talks about a lot of the issues with our current democracy and offers some ways to change that. One of his key points is that the democratic process needs to feel open and inviting. Citizens need to feel like they can participate, that they are heard, and that government spaces are accessible. I think the same principle applies to social media and social media discourse. Most of our current social media does not offer truly welcoming and accessible spaces that encourage people to take part, encourage their voices, and create meaningful discussion. Our social media creates the illusion of these open spaces where everyone can participate and everyone's voice is valued. But really, as we talked about earlier, certain voices get elevated over others while others get completely drowned out. Most social media is not actually conducive to productive conversation, and we need to change that so that it is. We also need to drop elitist thinking. This idea that we must only be exposed to correct information or expert opinions as a way to remedy our social media woes will not work. As much as some people might not like to hear this, people who are not experts in a certain field can still have good ideas. And even if they're wrong, it can be important to hear those thoughts nevertheless and understand why certain people think and feel that way. Sometimes people who aren't experts even have things to offer that the experts might not have thought of because they have a different frame of mind or perspective. And so just because someone is not a political scientist, they're not a biologist, they're not an urban planner, it doesn't mean that they can't still have good ideas that positively contribute to these realms of thought. And by suggesting that we only listen to professional or correct opinions, that doesn't alleviate any of these issues. It actually just further makes people feel disconnected and disenfranchised. Masulo et al. In their paper, What Social Media Could Be, highlights 14 points on ways to rebuild and reshape social media in a positive sense. And those 14 points fall under 4 distinct categories: welcome, connect, understand, and act. Under the welcome category, they have invites participation, ensures safety, encourages humanization, and keeps information secure. I believe that if we start with the welcome, the rest will come. If we invite participation, encourage humanization, and keep information secure, the rest of the changes will fall naturally. When we create welcoming and open spaces that encourage sharing thoughts and ideas, we have the foundation that is critical for building better community, society, politics, all of these spaces. So I think that is what we need to do. We need to re-envision social media in a way that is truly participatory, truly community-oriented, where everyone has a voice. And if we can do that, we will radically transform both social media and politics, and there will be a lot more hope in the overall social environment. So I wanted to leave you on that more positive note. There was a lot that I covered in this video. If you've made it all the way to the end and you enjoyed this video, please click the like button down below. It is a great way for you to show your support and let me know that you liked this kind of content. If you're looking for more fact-based, non-biased information that engages with the news and the world in a critical way, then please do consider subscribing to my channel, because that is my ultimate goal, to engage with what is happening in our world in a critical, fact-based, and non-biased way. So again, if that interests you, please do subscribe so you can see my future videos when they come out. But I'm going to leave that here. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'm Nathaniel, and this has been Let's Talk Politics.